Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to bring the Meet the Candidates portion of Broward County Supervisor of Elections. It is my pleasure, on behalf of the Miramar-Pembroke Pines Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Weston Florida Chamber of Commerce, the business partnership of Davie and Cooper City, and the Pembroke Park West Park Chamber of Commerce to bring to you this forum today. We have invited all of the candidates for Supervisor of Elections, and it looks like the only one who showed up with us today is Ms. McBreen. Ms. McBreen, we're happy to see you today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Can you hear me?
I can definitely hear you.
Great.
I want to thank you again for your time. We'll watch to see if anyone comes in a little bit later, but definitely wanted to, happy that you're here with us today. And I'm going to start off and just have you talk about why you're running for Supervisor of Elections and what you plan on bringing to that position if you are elected.
Okay, well, thank you. As you mentioned, I'm Catherine McBreen, and I'm running for Supervisor of Elections for Broward. And the reason that I'm running is because I think it's time that we step back and take a look at the Supervisor of Elections office and make it a better place, a place that Broward can be really proud of. And I think that I'm kind of an outsider coming in, so I think that I would be the perfect person for that opportunity. Do you want me to go on and tell you why I think I'm qualified?
Absolutely, I would love to hear that.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to mention, for me, voting is the most fundamental of all of our rights. I mean, if we didn't have the ability to vote and make sure that it was fairly counted, I mean, we wouldn't have any of these other rights that we have here in the United States. So I think voting is really an important, very important process. So for the last, well, let me start at the beginning. I'm an attorney, and I've specialized in regulatory and compliance law, which means it's kind of really boring stuff, but it's the stuff that keeps you safe. And I've been in the financial services industry, so I've used that regulatory and compliance law to make sure that all the securities transactions, trading, all of those kinds of things take place fairly and accurately with all the laws that surround all of that stuff. I started my career out as a compliance and regulatory attorney, and then I was fortunate enough, I worked for a large Midwestern bank called Harris Bank in the Chicago area. And I was fortunate enough to be able to take over an operational area. And I managed 200 to 300 people. And it was really during the 1990s. And those of you who are very young, probably like many of you here, probably don't remember, but we used to do things like get statements on our accounts like annually or quarterly. And during that time in the 1990s, I learned to help the bank move its processes so all of the accounts that it had could start to be daily valued, is what was called back then. So I took everything I learned in managing that unit, and I joined a company called Spectrum Group, which I've been with for the last 30 years. And what we do at Spectrum Group is we go into financial institutions like banks, trust companies, brokerage firms, everybody who's in the financial industry, and we audit their processes and procedures, and then we make recommendations on how they can make them better. So I think that I can take what I've learned over the last so many years of my career and apply that to exactly what happens at the Supervisor of Elections office, because it's a very process-oriented job to really make sure that everything's being done accurately. And so that's how I would like to spend the next, however many years of my life. I'm fortunate to be able to do that.
So talking about processes, Broward County has, over the years, through our election cycle, been the talk of the nation, and
Yes.
not in a positive way. So what we would like to know is, what types of changes do you see moving forward that need to occur within the Supervisor of Elections office to make us a more solid area for voting?
You're exactly right. I mean, the one thing that I want to promise is I don't want hordes of journalists outside the doors of the Supervisor of Elections office on election night. I want to be done quickly and accurately and have everybody be proud of Broward County. So what would I do? I would start at the very beginning by doing what I've done my whole career, tearing the place apart and going through every process and procedure and making sure that they all work and that they're all effective. And we'd make some changes, I bet. I bet we'd look at some of the processes, like some of the voting, how it's happening in the different precincts. I've heard lots of stories that people brought to me that we need to look at. We actually need to look at technology. The technology isn't that new. And we all know, I mean, this year, as many of you know, a lot of people are going to be doing mail-in voting. Mail-in voting is going to change how a lot of the processes and the procedures. I apologize for my dog in the back. There's some things I just can't control. So with mail-in voting, that's just the first step toward another step, which is, more and more technology. People may be someday voting from their phones or wherever the right place, or their computers at least. So we need to take technology and expand it throughout the supervisor of elections offices, and maybe start with Broward as a testing point, or the best place to start, and then work with the rest of the state even to try to make it not statewide or nationwide or whatever the right thing to be is, because we really need to look. It's like a business. These businesses have to keep moving forward, and we can't stay in the past worrying about hanging chads and things like that.
As you look at the supervisor of elections office, and my guess is that you probably have done your homework in that process just because of your financial backing that you talked at the beginning. Are there certain things that you already know that you want to see changed immediately, or are you keeping yourself with an open mind going into there with a blank slate and then making those changes as you go through?
Keeping my mind open with a blank slate, I do believe that there are probably processes and procedures that can be enhanced and made much more efficient. I mean, with any governmental agency, most of us realize that and understand that. But I think that it's also part of the people thing. You have to look at the people who are qualified, not just come in and say, oh, I'm going to cut the staff by X amount. That doesn't do anything to make you a good leader. You have to figure out who the good people are that are working there, all the things that they know. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that people have. And so it may be that there are people that we make processes more efficient, and we take either those people or at least their positions and move them towards working on future things that we need to really be able to do. And that would be what you want to do in the first 12 to 14 months, because that's when you have, the workflow varies a lot at the supervisor of elections offices. I'm sure you all can imagine, because on the years where there's a big election, that's all the focus. Whereas in the other years, it's more about updating and keeping records up to date. And obviously there's a lot that can be done in those procedures as well.
You mentioned absentee voting that we have here in Florida, and that being on the increase. And it was a major increase in the primary already this year. With that knowledge, knowing that most individuals during these times of crisis, like with COVID, we end up keeping certain things as the pandemic ends. And my belief is that absentee voting is going to be one of those things, that people are just going to be more prevalent in the aspect of doing absentee voting instead of going to the polls. That's going to change how your organization operates, or
Absolutely.
the supervisor election operates. Where do you see the future of that maybe going to, as you see more people doing absentee voting and doing mail-in voting than they would going to the actual polls?
I think that
some of your recommendations, I guess I'm asking.
No, I agree 100%. I think more and more people are going to do absentee voting, especially as they see we are going to have a good outcome here in Florida. And that's because they've tied the absentee voting to technology. So you get your absentee ballot and you mail it in, and you can track that ballot and you can see that it's actually been counted. Now, in a lot of the other states, they don't have that technology. In a lot of the other states, they're just randomly sending out ballots to the last address that you lived at. And hopefully that person still lives there and not somebody else isn't going to vote that ballot. But Florida has it really done well, and they can actually use this as a model going forward. But that will have a lot of changes. We'll have to look at the types of people that we have, how many people are in those roles that are making sure that we're counting the ballots. Maybe we don't need as many poll workers someday, because not as many people are going to be coming to do their, face-to-face voting. And also, like I said before, maybe we need to start looking at even the next step, which is not just mail-in, but actually voting online. So we need to look at what we have there. It's a big budget that they have at the supervisor of elections, at least I think it's big, and move the people and the processes into the future as opposed to leaving things as they are today.
Another area of concern that I am hearing from the general community and business community, with all this uprising of Black Lives Matter and all this dissension between the election and the candidates and Republican, Democrat, all that, there are concerns from individuals about the safety of going to an election site.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that moving in with the supervisor of elections position as this continues to grow? And or do you see that not being an issue as much for the future?
Well, hopefully this is something that's sort of going to go away after this year if we can deal with some of the issues that's being brought up by the Black Lives Matter. And hopefully we won't see ongoing riots in the future. However, riots or even threats. But I do think that it is going to be important if there are certain areas that we feel that people may be more likely to be protesting at, et cetera, to make sure there's lots of, I'm sorry, but lots of police presence to be able to ensure that the people who are going to vote feel safe. And that's what's important on election day. I also think that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to go out and vote early voting, and there are lots of opportunities to do that. There probably won't be as many threats because that's just harder to predict. You know, if you've gone to some of these early voting places, some of them are empty and some of them are very full. So that's something that the current supervisor of elections is going to have to monitor and look at. But when I've spoken to people at the sheriff's office, both the current sheriff and the candidate for sheriff, they're both like really on top of what all of this means. And if, you know, how do you combine a police presence, et cetera, in the future? It also might mean more people decide to absentee vote.
Yeah, I'm going to just let you close and tell us again why you're the best candidate to run for supervisor of elections. And I do want to thank you for your time today. Thinking that it's important that you are talking to approximately a quarter of the county's voting population through our organization.
Great. Well, great. Well, so I think that I know that I'm the better candidate. And the reason is because even though my competitor has some technology background and he went to West Point, so I give him kudos for all of that. And anybody who's been in the military, I really admire. The difference is that two things. First of all, I have a legal background, and even though a lot of people say, ooh, lawyers, I'm not that kind of lawyer. I'm like a boring kind of lawyer, but I think that it's really important in the role of supervisor of elections to be able to look at all of the different changing laws that are happening all the time and be able to apply them to the processes that they impact, because sometimes people won't understand the relationship between a law and the process that is, and that's what I've done my whole life. The other thing about my ability is that I've been in the business world for 30 years. And I think that because I have looked at lots of different businesses and how they do business, it actually solved business problems. I think that I'm better qualified. My opponent is younger and just doesn't have as many years of experience. So I think for those reasons, and because of my passion for doing something at the end of my career that I really care about, which is fair voting, I think I'm the best candidate.
I can tell right now that you are not a politician in essence, because, and I will correct that real quickly for you. How can people reach out to you during this campaign season for supervisor elections?
Several ways, and you're right, I'm not a politician at all, so I don't know how to do that. There are different ways. My website is www.catherinemcbreen.com. I'm on Catherine McBreen for Supervisor of Elections on Facebook, and the similar address is the same address on Twitter, basically, if you type in those things. So you can DM me on Facebook, reach out to me versus Facebook. You can email me, it's cmcbreen54@icloud.com, and I'm open to all of your questions and comments and would love to get input. Some of the best ways to learn is the things that people have experienced when they've gone to vote. So that would be great.
We want to thank you very much for your time this evening. On behalf of the Miramar Pembroke Pines Chamber of Commerce, the Weston Florida Chamber of Commerce, the Pembroke Park West Park Chamber of Commerce, and the Business Partnership of Davie and Cooper City, and the South Florida Business Partnership Legislative Action Committee. This has been Meet the Candidates for Broward County Supervisor of Elections. Thank you for you tonight, and remember to vote by November 3rd.
Thank you.